We've been doing very well so far all this year. I promised an hour and a half dialogue with only 15 minutes of intellectual content to stir our discussion pattern. And you've not failed me yet, but by doing that, we've broken the ice. It's nasty weather outside, so let's have fun inside. But before we do that, I want to introduce our host and co-partner on this series, Helen Chung, to say a few words. Helen?
Very energetic, right? And given a rainy day, warm welcome from the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And it's really, this MIT series has been running in this hall under, the Charles Cow Auditorium. And the father of optical fiber gave us the internet world. And with that spirit, we carry on to stimulate more great ideas, innovations, and technologies. And it's the whole essence of the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park's presence in Hong Kong to nurture more of these great ideas into value creation. And for all this, we need bold entrepreneurs. And today, we are glad to have Mr. Victor Fung, so a very revered entrepreneur, to share with us his history of entrepreneurial development and what insights we can get from him. So I will turn the floor back to Sept and have Victor.
Great. No, super. Thanks. Before I have Victor come on up, and while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to be out there with you with this microphone for the Q&A and for the discussion, and we're going to have someone on this side. Try and catch our eye. Raise your hand so we get microphones and get as many questions in as possible, because we're ending promptly at 5:30. And Jane right here is going to help me. He'll be on this side, I'll be on that side. What generally happens is we start off slow, and then at the end there's 10 more questions that don't get answered because you're just warming up. So I warmed you up already. I'm not going to do a long introduction of Dr. Victor Fung. He's coming here under his capacity as chairman and founder of the Fung Global Institute, which is working on really breathtaking, game-changing kind of research. But it's basically Asia's voice in the global dialogue, and I cannot think of anyone better suited for that than Dr. Victor Fung. So with that, and not reading the bios, because that would give us no time at the end because he's so accomplished, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Victor Fung.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm really very happy to be here, especially as this is very much associated with my alma mater, MIT. So I have to carry on the entrepreneurial tradition. I actually have been involved in rather sort of more established companies much from my career, but I do want to say that being in a room with entrepreneurs is certainly very inspirational. And my last major period of contact with people like yourselves was actually in the 1980s, when I founded what I believe to be the first venture capital fund in Hong Kong. And for a period of about 5 years, I was very much involved in high-tech startups and so on. But today, I'm afraid I only read about high-tech and not participating directly in it. But what I'd like to do today, actually, is maybe to speak for 15 minutes, right? And you're going to open the trap door if I speak more. Okay. And to really give you a perspective on how I think the world is evolving. I first would like to look back a little bit to put it in perspective, and then maybe look forward from this point on, maybe for the next 30 years. And then really talk a little bit about a subject which frankly I'm beginning to learn more myself, which is the whole digital commerce and how that fits into the world as it's evolving. And then I'll be more than happy, obviously, to talk about specific business aspects or other aspects of entrepreneurship that I may be able to respond to. There was a very famous Harvard Business School professor called Ted Levitt. He was actually a marketing professor. Some of you might have read his work. His famous work at the very beginning of his career was something called Marketing Myopia. It's a very famous piece. But in 1983, he wrote actually a landmark piece called the globalization of markets. The globalization of markets. At that time, in 1983, he really envisioned that the world is going to be basically a world that will be dominated by multinationals, all vertically integrated. And the markets, of products like what you would call fast-moving consumer products, fast-moving consumer FMCG products, would be actually more or less the same products will be sold everywhere. There will be a total homogenization of global markets. And in fact, the production side was relatively easy because everything would have huge economies of scale. And the world would pretty much be dominated by multinationals. Now that thesis was actually debated for at least 20 years. But I now think that for the last 10 years, you can see that the jury is now not out, but is in. And it's very clear, as brilliant a man as Ted Levitt was, the world is gone completely the other way. It's not going to be homogenized into one major market. It's actually now moving into the direction of mass customization and a globalization of consumption, but on a mass customization basis. So let me give you a little bit of perspective on that. In fact, I would say that the word globalization was first used by Ted Levitt. And this landmark article in 1983 in the Harvard Business Review was the time that they first talked about this. Okay, what I think really happened is, I think the story starts actually in 1978. Just 5 years before Ted Levitt's article. And that actually was the time, as you all recall, when Mr. Deng Xiaoping started the economic opening of China. And it started with the creation of the special economic zones, the most important of which is Shenzhen, right across from Hong Kong. All of you know this story. I won't repeat it. But what we saw for a period of 30 years, from 1978 onwards, was really what I would call the globalization of production, where the production process that used to be localized became completely globalized, and the growth of what you are now calling the global supply chains. And that's what drove our own family company, Li and Fung. For this period, basically, we were very much a part of the globalization of production. And we basically created the whole company of Li and Fung around this idea of taking a production process and then segmenting it into components, and then actually putting each component with a part of a factory somewhere in your country or somewhere else in another country, okay, where it is actually best in class to manufacture that part of the process. And then you reintegrate, okay, for the final product. Now, that process of globalized supply chains is now taken for granted. And what we saw during this 30-year period was this globalization of supply chains, of production. Now, there are two things that absolutely drove this globalization process, the globalization of production. And that is, the first, if you actually recall, which I think is very significant, was the entrance to the global labor market of 1.5 billion workers. And if you think of the world pre-1978 and then the world post-1978, and you can see that the world actually got an influx of 1.5 billion workers. Now, many of these people were obviously in China. China probably at the height were maybe 400 million workers, and then 200 million was sort of migrant workers moving around the country. But it was not only China. The markets of like India, Southeast Asia all open up. And sometimes people forget that the breakup of the Comecon countries really released a whole slew of labor, symbolized by the Poles being in London. But actually, the real symbol should be the Germans subcontracting to the Czechs. And it's really part of the unleashing of the 1.5 billion workers into the global workforce really drove this globalization of production. All of a sudden, you actually offshoring began to be a real possibility, and the availability of labor. And frankly, it's not just the low value-added labor, but actually, if you think Eastern Europe as well, especially in the early days, there was actually a very high standard and high-level labor that was also added to the global workforce. Now, but it was not just as simple as a revolution driven by production. Driven by the addition of labor alone. What actually Mr. Ted Levitt did not envision was that in the 1990s, we had a technological revolution, something called the internet. Now, the internet brought many things. The high-profile things are the stuff that, that the internet has brought. But internet also really brought a complete revolution to the way that the production process was being done. And what Li and Fung is doing these days of actually globalizing the global supply chain would have not been possible without two enablers. One was the internet. At any one time, in any point in time, we have probably thousands of orders running around in the world, and bits and pieces everywhere. How do we keep track of all this? It would not have been possible without the advent of the internet. So I think the internet was not really adding the frills on top. It was actually changing the fundamental block. The whole idea of actually, really putting this in the fundamentally affecting the production process. Now, the other, of course, is what I would call synchronized commerce. The idea of modern logistics getting stuff from here to there just in time. And these two enablers, very much technologically driven, together with the influx of 1.5 billion workers, changed the face of production. And that, I think, was a fundamental change. Because once you start, from a policy standpoint, once you start, what we call atomizing the production process, you begin to democratize it, because pieces then could be subcontracted all around the world to SMEs. And SMEs can actually participate in the global commerce much earlier than they would if you actually demanded that each one do a whole vertical. So it's actually become a game of specializing in niches and what we would call niche hunting. Now, actually, that really culminated in probably until 30 years from 1978 to 2008. Now, I pick on 2008 because it's actually a very convenient time. It's also the advent of the Lehman crisis. I don't want to blame everything on the Lehman crisis alone, but actually that was a real turning point. And if you recall, just before the Lehman crisis, Time magazine had a front cover. It was China World Factory. Remember that? And in fact, that actually was a culmination in my mind of the globalization of the production process. But something very fundamental shifted during the transition from the 2008 onwards. And if you then start thinking about the world from 2008 forward for the next 30 years, I think what is really happening in my mind is, in addition to the production which has been globalized, we're now actually seeing the globalization of consumption. And if I can bring you back to the pre-1978 era, the world was actually quite tranquil. Basically everything was produced locally and consumed locally. So for 30 years since 1978, you actually had a globalization of production, but consumption was still local. Consumption was still local. In fact, most of the stuff was actually consumed by the OECD countries, which back then, in the recent years, accounted for over 80% of global consumption. And it's not until 2030, I see the forecast, and beyond, maybe to the middle of this century, would you even get the percentage of consumption from the developing countries or the rest of the world to exceed the 50% mark, which will then make it higher than the OECD countries. So what you really saw was while production was globalized, consumption was still very much localized, and everything focused on basically with America and Europe. And in our world, during this time, me and Fung and other companies, we sourced, really in the developing countries, mainly in Asia, and we sold in the OECD countries, mainly America and Europe. So it's actually buy from the East and sell in the West. And you buy from the East, sell in the West. The supply chains were actually very simple. It moved only in one direction. Buy from the East, sell in the West. Buy from the East, sell in the West, and this on. Every time a product moves through, you clip off another 0.01 cent. It's basically. And remember in those days, those of you around, containers all came back empty. Because it was unidirectional, okay? So it was because consumption was still localized while production was globalized. And we organized this whole thing. Now, so what's happening? If you can now start thinking, what happened? Nobody talks about only China as the world's factory. Everybody's talking about China as a market. What we're really now seeing, if you think about what happened since 2008 and looking forward now, projecting yourself to the next 25, 30 years, what really is happening is the consumption is also now beginning to be globalized. For one thing, and we're studying this at the Global Institute, for one thing, we think over the next generation, 25, 30 years, we're going to see the addition of 3.5 billion middle-class consumers into the global consumption. Okay? And again, China will account for a big part of it, but not all of it, certainly. China don't have that many people. So China, probably over 600, McKinsey did a study that said that by the year 2020, actually in 10 years' time, little over 2020, we're going to get about 600 million middle-class consumers in China alone. But these people will appear, middle-class consumers will appear in India, in ASEAN, in Africa, in South America, etc. So in addition to what you're going to see, in addition to the consumption in the OECD countries, is beginning of the growth of the middle class in areas outside OECD. And your markets all of a sudden appear outside the OECD countries. So when you're actually thinking about global production, it's not as simplistic, right? Source in the East, sell in the West. You still source in the East, but a lot of it will go to the West, but you're also thinking of actually distributing in other developing markets. Your supply chains become a lot more nuanced. Okay, and at the same time, I have to say, we ourselves are now beginning to buy from the West and sell in China because made in Italy commands a premium in China. So you're actually getting now a completely nuanced picture as you globalize production. But it's not only about an addition of 3.5 billion middle-class consumers. And they're actually now mostly outside the OECD countries. But the key is the revolution caused by digital commerce. Even within the major markets, and obviously in the growing new markets, it's the way in which the commerce is conducted. And now I'm looking at the interface, the retail interface with the consumer. That is actually going through an absolute revolution. Pre-2008, let's say, or maybe a little bit. But even if you look at the numbers, it's after 2008 that people like Alibaba really took off. But actually, everything was pretty much localized distribution. Distribution is mostly through retail outlets that are brick and mortar on the ground, right? Now, you see the growth of e-commerce, but they were still a relatively small part. Now it's actually growing and growing fast. So what you're really now seeing is a growth of the way commerce is conducted, even within the major markets, within countries, but absolutely now cross-border. You're going to see the growth of cross-border e-commerce, and also the idea of ordering and shipping across borders, which will change the whole way consumption is actually done. And the globalization of consumption now is absolutely on. So if you step back and look at a very simple 2x2 matrix, production could be either local or global. Consumption could be either local or global. It's very simple. You started, really in the local box. In the last 30 years, you moved up to the local consumption but global production. And then now you've moved to the global box. Globalized consumption, globalized production. And you really got to think through, what does this all mean in this new world? And I would actually think that my own view is the e-commerce isn't the strict e-commerce is actually not the answer. I think that's only a part of the answer. What we're seeing now, the answer is actually emerging, and it's a mixture of bricks and clicks. It's what people are now calling omni-channel in China, people call O2O, online to offline, offline to online, and how that integrates. So it is not just really now doing away with bricks and mortar on the ground, because I think, by the way, I think that will always be there. It will never be completely replaced, of course. And it's also not completely e-commerce, where everything is initiated on the web and then transacted on the web. But it will be bricks and clicks. Some merging of the two. Basically, some people will say omni-channel, we use the word. And the core of the retailing interface will actually morph to this area of how do you combine the bricks and clicks. And during Q&A time, I'll be more than happy to talk about that more. But as you go into this new era of this huge influx of 3.5 billion consumers, this huge revolution of digital commerce, that will change the face of the retailing interface, the entire global supply chain will be changed. It will affect every piece of supply chain all the way up to the design and creation phase. Very simple. Let me just give you a very simple example, and then I'm finishing it out. Let's have a conversation. We are living today in a world, I'm talking about, let's say, Li and Fung now, of basically job lots. Every order, 100,000 shirts will come in as one order, very discreet. Now, we do a lot about slicing and dicing this order to make it produced in 5 countries, etc., and then put it all together and ship. But it's still moving around in discrete lots, right? The whole system is a job lot system. I think the world is going to move to a world of continuous flow because of the way the e-commerce. So what you're going to see in actual effect is the total volume will grow, but it will consist of a much larger number of much smaller orders. You see, so the whole thing becomes, instead of lots of job lots, becomes a continuous, moving towards a continuous flow. And I would submit that you would change the whole face of manufacturing as a result. What we call MOQs, minimum order quantities, that you'll be dealing with. People say, well, we want 100 of these. You mean 100,000 dozen? No, I mean 100 pieces of this style. So that is going to cause huge problems. And the factories, instead of making 1 line change every week, they will make 7 line changes every day. So the whole way of flexible manufacturing and so on will have to completely change. So that just gives you an idea of how, as this revolution comes in, as we move now into the globalized production and globalized consumption phase over the next 30 years, how the whole world is going to be changing, and specifically in terms of supply chains, in terms of the way the trade will flow, the way the investments will flow, and importantly, where the jobs are going to be. and what types of jobs, or level jobs they're going to be. So let me stop here. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Raising the hands. Good. Jamie, one here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fung.
Yeah.
I come especially for your event.
Oh, thank you.
All right. It's been a very nice lecture. What evidence in the Li and Fung Institute saying the e-commerce is growing? What evidence? And how you expect the manufacturing industry is going to change? You said it will be going to change. How is it going to be changed? I want more details.
Okay.
We're talking about lean manufacturing these days,
Yeah.
right? If that changed so fast, would that affect this kind of algorithm?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Should I answer one by one, or take a few, or what?
No, one by one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at how e-commerce is changing first. I think if you look at the data carefully, the amount of transactions over the web is absolutely going to, that are dependent on some aspect of the web is going to increase. It's probably now in US and China moving up to 10% of retail, and maybe moving beyond 10% of retail. Some people say maybe even 30, 40% of retail. But let's be careful. It's not what I would call pure web-only e-commerce. In fact, again, let me do a very simple 2x2 matrix. If you think, transactions on the one axis that are initiated offline and then initiated online, and then the consummation of the transaction, okay, the actual transaction is done offline or online, okay, a 2x2 matrix. Then very simply, the traditional retailing is in the bottom left-hand corner, right? It's offline initiation and offline transaction. You go into a store, everything's offline. And then the upper right-hand box is online transaction, online initiation, online transaction. You learn about the product, you research about all online, and then you transact online, and it gets delivered to your home. Now the growth, actually, if you look carefully at the data and the latest studies, is not going to be in that box. It's actually in the other two boxes. The initiation offline, and then the transaction online. Or also the fourth box, which is initiation offline, and then transaction online. These boxes. I forgot which axis I put it. So it's really not the pure e-commerce you're talking about. In fact, if you look at the latest studies by people like Forrester Research, they think the pure online initiation, online transaction is going to level off at about 10% retail. But the transaction, the total e-commerce volume is going to go up. Where's it coming from? It's actually coming from the other two sectors. In fact, the initiation offline, that means you go to the store to actually look at the product, and then you go home to buy, and the transaction online, a lot of people call showrooming, right? And then some people, the other sector, some people call reverse showrooming. In fact, I just learned a new term, maybe very familiar with, called web rooming. You actually initiate online, you come to the store to buy. Okay, and in fact, a lot of the luxury retailers are actually doing a lot of that. They want you to actually transact in the store, but they use e-commerce and so on to actually get your information, get your traffic. So it's at those sectors that are actually providing the additional volume. It's not the complete, online sector. And in fact, if you look at what's happening in the brick and mortar world, there's more and more technology now inside the store. And you may be running around the store, and then you'll be buying stuff in the store in the normal way. And then you'll also be clicking and buying stuff on the web at the same time. And there's a lot of technology inside the store that would actually enable you to actually transact on the web while you're inside the store. So it's almost like even the the traditional sector is also becoming sort of online commerce. So what I want to say is that you really got to focus on some of the other sectors and not just thinking of what would be the traditional .coms. So I think that would be my, yeah.
Good answer. Okay, yes.
Okay, sorry. Manufacturing is what I basically said. It will change the whole face of manufacturing. You see, what this enables us to do for the first time, I think, is true mass customization. Having every product geared to a very small segment of the market, niche market, or in the extreme to just one person. Mass customization. That means your whole production process is no longer, really producing in big job lots. And you've got to really think about a manufacturing process which is efficient, doing ones and not 100,000s. You see, your efficiency has to come with other things, how you actually do the whole design process, etc., and not just an economy of scale sort of efficiency.
So you're saying the 3D printing, 3D technology?
You want to talk about 3D printing? Let's come to that later. Maybe a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah. That question. Yeah.
So my name is Christine Chow. I run my own business. I also teach entrepreneurship and impact investment at Hong Kong University. I have 3 questions.
Yes.
The first one is when you started, you mentioned that you're not really involved in the high-tech startup industry anymore. Why not? I mean, Hong Kong has a very robust startup industry.
I would love to.
And I think a lot of people will be interested in why and why not, and how can we persuade you. And secondly, since you mentioned mass customization, and I'd like to take the conversation one step forward from not just online, offline, but from virtual to real interface.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Virtual to real interface. For example, I think Lego has started providing a service to users on designing their own Lego, and then and they will create them for them. So there is customers are no longer the ones who receive products, but they actively engage in creating it. So that bringing customers much closer to the brand. And I think that's great. I would like your view on how that could be developed and further developed into business opportunities. And the third question is, come back to the inevitably 3D printing. Why do you think so many fail?
Okay. Let me just answer it right to the third question, and I think it wraps in your first two. I've been actually tracking 3D printing for some time now. I think it's going to be quite interesting from many standpoints. In fact, as you all may know, 3D printing is actually a very old technology. It's been around for 30 years. The problem is, well, I shouldn't say it's a problem, the direction in which it's developed is actually up the supply chain in our compounders, going more and more into intricate production of very detailed shapes, which cannot be done by machine. It can only be done by 3D printing. And it become, you're creating multi-million-dollar machines that make very precise and intricate parts to send rockets to the moon. Let's put it that way. In order to use 3D printing in the consumer level, I think you've got to go down the supply chain towards the consumer. And what you really need is to think about how you use the 3D printing process at a consumer level to create products or to work with the consumer for your virtual view interface and involve the consumer really in the design process. So imagine yourself the following. You're sitting at your terminal at night and you logged into the Nike website. You're designing your own jogger. Your athletic shoe. You design any color, any shape, or no sole. I don't know what you can do with the jogger. And then after you finish with the software in which you design, you press a button on the machine next to you and the pair of joggers come out. Right? Now, I used to think, gee, it may happen, but it's for my granddaughter. Right? Not in my lifetime, but wrong. I think it's happening very soon. Now, what are the implications of that? Now, that I'm giving you an extreme example. I am completely doing the designing, right? And I get instantaneous reduction. So if you ask yourself, what's, from a public policy standpoint, what's going to happen to manufacturing? What's going to happen to logistics? What's going to happen to retailing? Serious questions. Okay? You know, but from the consumer standpoint, I now have total control over both the design and the delivery, etc. I think the key is what is the consumer acceptance of something like that. And you know, right now you see the problem is, you know, there's a lot of development in this field, and I've been trying to get track. You know, the way I would actually characterize the 3D printing today is if you go back to the personal computer. If you think when the first Apple computer was introduced, the one that you play Pong on, you know, and before that happened, what was happening to the personal computer? It was basically a huge cauldron of activity of hobbyists buying all their parts from Radio Shack and then assembling computers at home. We are now 3D printing at the Radio Shack stage, in my mind. Huge number of hobbyists, I would call them hobbyists. You know, in fact, a lot of patents that exist in 3D printing. And they are actually all doing experimentation, blah, 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 but nobody has done the equivalent of an Apple. Yes. I think we're totally pregnant and about to burst forward. And I think that would be an interesting thing. And I think it would revolutionize both what you're talking about, the consumer level, mass customization, and raise huge opportunities and problems from a public policy standpoint.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Sorry, maybe my answers are too long.
No, good, great answer.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask a quick question.
Okay.
In terms of tax and global trade balances between countries, how will all of this be affected in digital commerce 20 years from now, you see? Especially since a slice of bread or an egg going from Shenzhen to San Francisco, there's a lot of services. It's not just the cost.
Well, you're talking about something else we're doing at the Institute.
Yeah.
Okay, there are many questions there. I think we are in this. What I did not talk about when I described this model of the globalization of production in the last 30 years and now the globalization of consumption in the coming 30 years is the backdrop in the first 30 years was the global multilateral trading system. I can tell you, without WTO, Li and Fung cannot function the way that we have functioned. The question now, that system is under a lot of pressure. And how do you actually change that system to be the backdrop to the next 30 years of globalized consumption? You really got to think through. And there are many things that need to happen on a multilateral basis. For example, shipping of stuff cross-border is destroying a lot of local retail, local industry. And it's actually bypassing a lot of the rules, the taxes, etc. In fact, not only jobs are being destroyed in a local level, but the tax bases are disappearing, the whole tax base. So I think the world has to come to some form of regulation, and it has to be multilateral. That when you actually order something from a US website and you ship it to China, there's got to be some rules, or vice versa. So I think we need to think about that, and that will be ultimate constraint, if you would, on the unbridled expansion of this globalized consumption.
Okay, I'm Benny. I'm the founder of a small 7 years company. We also located in the science park. So we are doing cloud computing solution as a cloud computing solution provider for supply chain logistics.
Mm-hmm.
And compared to Li and Fung, we consider those 7 years still a startup compared to 100 years. So I would like to ask your advice, because we are at the moment designing the future strategy on. We are going to look into the direction of the big data for the for supply chain and
Yeah.
for, in particular for retail. But we're still at the early stage. For technology, we know that this is a very hot topic in US, in the West.
Yes.
But I would like to seek your advice in terms of the business and the market. If we are going in this direction, what would your advice to us in terms of the business strategy, and also do you think there will be a market, in particular in Asia and Hong Kong, for this big data and omnichannel? Okay.
Well, absolutely. I think you're right at the cutting edge. See, what I'm really saying is, with the advent of the omni-channel, the traditional brick and mortar retailing is changing very rapidly. Not only are the shopping habits, but actually the whole business model is changing, or has to change. In fact, if you're a real estate guy today with real estate, retail real estate, you have a real problem with your business model. Because what it is, normally you rent a space, is a percentage of sales, right? And subject to a minimum. It's normally like that. And then, in Hong Kong, you probably get maximum 3-year lease, and then the landlord starts all over again, right? Maybe in other places you get a waiver, but the basic model is a percentage rent. If you go into the omni-channel world, the whole concept of percentage rent is nonsense, right? The showrooming. That's why they say, the revenue is disappearing. So you need to actually also, in this day and age, think through the real brick and mortar with what you're doing in the web and actually make it holistic. If somebody has been in and within a certain period of time, if they actually purchase on the web, maybe you can be credited also because they've used the showroom. You see, you've got to have some concept like that. So also, what you like to do then is to think about approaching consumers, analyzing consumer behavior of actually all the shops in a mall or something like that, and that's all in the big data arena. I would say there are serious issues to be addressed on how you share information and how do you actually are able to have access to pool data and yet maintain confidentiality. So how do you actually do the analysis on a comprehensive basis, but the action is actually done on an individual basis? So I think all those things, I think you're at the forefront of where the whole thing is going. People are just this moment thinking about. By the way, on this omni-channel thing, I talk to many people now who are actually at the cutting edge. I can tell you, here's my finding. I've talked to it, frankly, all the people that are doing this really, that are high profile. And my finding is very simple. Everybody says it's going omni-channel and this will happen very quickly. Some would say even in the next 3 years, definitely in the 3 to 5 years. But nobody can tell you what the model is. So everybody knows it's changing, it will change very quickly, but nobody can tell you how it's going to change and what it's going to morph into. So I think this really is a perfect time for innovation. It's a perfect time for what I would call experimentation. Try different things. I don't know either. I can't tell you either, by the way, what that future model is. It's rapid experimentation. What you need to do is develop a culture in any company of rapid experimentation, what they call test and trash. And then every time you can emerge with new products, new ideas in this omni-channel space. I can tell you, I've talked to everybody. The three Mars, everybody. The Amazons, the Googles. Nobody has a clear idea of what this thing is morphing into. Okay.
Here and
Yeah.
back here.
Okay.
Hi, sir.
Yeah.
My name is Anupam. I'm studying MBA in CUSK. My question to you is on the same lines when you say that the consumption in the next 30 years will be global. So how does the logistic cost be lowered? Because right now, if we're doing shipment across borders, then a lot of import duties there. So to start with, will we have some set of rules or regulations within Asia that can actually cut down on the cost and
Okay, there are many levels I can answer that question. The most rudimentary level is, I think there's a lot of stuff still happening at the global level in which they would facilitate the movement of goods across borders. Like, you know, the way you define categories of products may be slightly different in different countries. You harmonize that and standardize. So you cut down the paperwork. And so harmonization of duties, you know, how to actually expedite the documentation, etc., make it paperless, pre-clearing procedures and so on. Huge amount happening on a very pragmatic level at the WTO. Everybody thinks WTO has failed, but actually in Bali in December of last year, they concluded an agreement on what is called trade facilitation, which is what you're talking about. So at one level, they're reducing the cost. And that would actually reduce the cost of doing business around the world, shipping stuff back and forth by about 10%. The numbers are huge, okay? Now, the next level that you could think about is as you do this type of thing, you know, what you're able to do is actually think about that last mile. You know, don't think that everything will be the logistics cost. In fact, I think there's a fundamental contradiction. If you think about the old brick and mortar model, the consumer is actually doing the last mile, right? In fact, if you now do the last mile and deliver to a consumer's home, there's absolutely no rhyme or reason why goods should be cheaper. You're actually doing more service, right? You may say the last mile in the old model, the consumer is doing self-service, right? And yet, we expect things to be cheaper on the web. It's really the culture that has developed, and I think that will change, by the way. I don't think the web will be cheap. I know this is against conventional wisdom. I think the web will begin market segmentation. You know, just like you do market segmentation in the real world, because it will be hooked also to the real world and bricks and clicks. But the point I want to make is, in order to cut down your logistics costs for the e-commerce companies, they're actually going back to the bricks and clicks model in a sense. Pick up at convenience stores or pick up at depots. In fact, what you're really doing is pushing the consumer to do self-service again in order to achieve a lower price. You see, in fact, the whole model was contradictory. Everybody says the web should be cheaper. Why? You know, because actually you do more service when you're actually servicing the consumer. That's why web companies have a hard time making money. They do more and charge less. You know, so it's just not logical. Now they're actually going back. So I think a model will evolve again to brick and clicks. You order on the web, you do everything, but you actually do your own pickup. So I think there are many levels in which I won't go on and on, but to answer your question.
Okay, a question back here, Hanson.
Oh, hi, I'm Hanson Chia. Hi, Victor, long time no see.
Hi.
First of all, I'd like to thank Christine Chow over there for plugging our company. She mentioned Lego. I'm a board member and shareholder of the company called Kyushu in Japan, which basically powered the engine behind Lego that allows users to design the product. But so along that line, the question is really, so now there's this whole trend towards enabling the user community of the fan base to design products. And then alongside that is a bunch of people who are acting as the manufacturers so that they bring the product from conception all the way to manufacturing. And I believe you're an investor in PCH in Shenzhen, and that's precisely what you're doing. My question is really, having come from the contract manufacturing world myself, I look at PCH on one hand, they have very large clients like Apple, you know, which are very mature, very stable, provides a huge revenue base for them, and relatively stable product iteration, right? On the other side, you have a bunch of young startups, very mature, you're working on the 147 iteration of their product, and you know, taking a lot of the time on the manufacturing. It's not going to be economical in the long run, right? To service these young guys and all that. And I was just wondering how the PCH model will evolve, or in not just PCH, I'm using it as an example, but in general, people who are handling this user base of user community designing products and demanding the manufacturers to do it for them so that they can service that little niche client base of maybe 2,000, something like that?
Yeah, I think the answer lies to your question lies in looking at total supply chain cost. See, when you look at the cost of the conventional way, you people focus really just on the manufacturing portion and maybe the logistics portion. But they really forget there's a whole R&D portion that actually precedes that. Okay? Now, if you're just a contract manufacturer, you don't see it at all. It's actually done by the brand owner. But what we're seeing now are models that are slicing and slicing in which you amalgamate the entire supply chain, you see. And you actually now, in a sense, doing away, it looks like it's very inefficient to service very small job lots and changing models and so on. But you're only looking at a small part of the supply chain. If you look at also the creation and the R&D costs, which the consumer are now assuming a lot themselves, the total cost of the supply chain becomes a lot more reasonable. You see what I'm saying? In fact, I would submit that some of the stuff that you see even in literature is comparing apples with oranges. They're actually comparing a part of the supply chain with some people doing the whole thing. So I think the idea of what you were talking about, the virtue, the real, to me it's the merging of the entire process all the way from conceptualization to actual use, and not really having it in small segments. And the consumers are participating in that, and I think the total supply chain cost is not necessarily lower, and even if it's lower, people may want to pay a premium. Now the final point I would say is actually a very subtle one. If you look at supply chain, I talked a lot about soft $3, some of you may be familiar with. This thing came out of the factory costing $1. By the time it goes to the consumer at the retail level, it's $4. So there's something that's in the supply chain beyond the production, which is $3. And I call that the soft $3. And it's the logistics incentive. But if you analyze the $3, you know what the big portion of the cost there is? The cost is the cost of producing the stuff that the consumer doesn't want, that you have to basically sell at a discount or throw away. It's the cost of the markdown. That is probably $1 to $1.50 of the $3. You see what I'm saying? So the whole world has the problem of producing ahead of actual demand. And you've got to forecast demand, and it's very hard business to forecast, especially as the market niche is breaking smaller and smaller. The demand fluctuates more and more, right? It becomes harder and harder to forecast. So what you're really doing is a huge amount of wastage and so on in the supply chain when you do it the conventional way. Now, when you do it the other way, when you're actually doing mass customization, it looks as if every piece, you're producing 100 of a style. How can you get the efficiency of 100,000? The point is the 100 is absolutely demanded before you even produce it. And the amount of wastage goes to zero in the extreme, right? My Nike thing, I designed it for me. I press the button, it's here. I use it, right? I designed it. But if I'm buying a Nike shoe in a shop, Nike is guessing what I want to buy. And chances are there's a lot of markdowns at the end of the season. So you've got to look at the wastage that's in the supply chain in the conventional model. And you compare it to this new model, which looks like very inefficient when you look at you producing one piece or a very small lot versus a huge lot. But actually, the wastage factor is huge in this. And again, you're not comparing apples with apples. When you look at the total cost, including the wastage, this mass customization could be even more efficient.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Victor.
Yeah.
My name is Tony. I'm an entrepreneur and investor in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question pertaining to the economy of Hong Kong, the economic problem right now there's a massive imbalance. Hong Kong has lost a lot of trade between China and the rest of the world. It used to be we export, but no longer we are in that position. Now the trade goes straight from China to the rest of the world. Also, we've lost a lot of the investment. It no longer comes to Hong Kong, but it goes straight to China. The consumers, right now it's a big retail play, but sooner or later that's going to change when all the world brands go to China. So I'd like to ask you a question. If you were in the position of, say, the chief executive of Hong Kong, and I'm not tempting fate here.
That's a very hypothetical.
If you were the chief executive of Hong Kong, how would you address this problem of Hong Kong's economy losing trade, investment, and consumer?
Well, the first thing I would say is what you're really talking about is a lot of conventional thinking and wisdom, which I do agree is there, especially in the popular press. But it's actually too simple looking at the problem. It's true that the shipments are actually going from, let's say, China to America, right? It's true, and no longer coming through Hong Kong. Our re-export trade is not going up, etc., etc. However, if you think of the world as now consisting of global supply chains, I would submit that Hong Kong, especially in the consumer product, does the bulk of the world's orchestration of these supply chains. We actually provide Li and Fung. You know, we ship a lot of stuff, but not necessarily all through Hong Kong. But we actually are based in Hong Kong. We actually employ people here. We orchestrate the global supply chains. And we actually use the Hong Kong banking, etc., etc. So what you're really saying is the movement of goods could be occurring outside Hong Kong, but the control of the movement and the actual high level value added is actually conducted here. And our economy, and this is not only about Li and Fung, I wish it were. There are thousands, tens of thousands of firms, large and small, doing exactly the same thing. We are a global supply chain manager of this type of, and it's because of our traditional connection of both the production side and the buy side. Now we need to continue to be in that orchestrator of supply chains position as the world morphs towards the model that I'm talking about. I think that's the challenge. You know, I think right now, I think we are actually in a pretty comfortable position. I know it may not sometimes feel that way, but we're at a pretty full employment, and the economy is not humming badly at all. You know, and we're not just orchestrating trade from China, we're orchestrating trade from wherever trade is now beginning to be conducted, right? As the globalization of production proceeds further into other countries around the region and around the world. And now we have got to think through as the consumption gets globalized, how is the trade patterns going to move? Can you still orchestrate the same way? It may turn a lot more into relocalization and localized production for the fast delivery and the mass customization aspect that we just talked about. Or is there another business which actually orchestrates the flow the other way of actually getting products from Europe and other places into China, for example, which we have not traditionally done. And we orchestrate those types of supply chains. But if anything, if you think about it, the supply chains are getting more complex, right? It used to be simple, as I said. You source in the East and you sell in the West. In fact, the supply chains are static. You can think of it that way. And it's the same movement, and you're just looking for efficiency. Now the supply chains are moving. It's actually in motion. And you need to be effective and not just efficient at this stage. I think it's a huge opportunity for Hong Kong. Nobody understands the movement and orchestration of supply chain like we do. I guarantee you that. We meaning Hong Kong.
Okay.
That's what we grew up on.
All right. Another question back here.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Fung.
Yeah.
I'm a secondary school student. I have two questions for you. First of all, what does this new dynamic market mean specifically for entrepreneurs? What type of opportunities do you think it will present to us, and what do we need to be wary of? Second of all, as a student myself, where should I go from this? As an aspiring technological entrepreneur, what can I do to further this type of development for myself?
Okay, that's a very big question. I think what I'm seeing now is really the world splitting into larger and larger number of small pieces, the atomization of supply chain. And now there'll be atomization of the consumption and so on. And as more and more small pieces appear, I think there are more and more opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises and startups. I think the world it's actually ripe for more and more SMEs, more and more ideas, more and more startups. Think of it the other way. If the world went the other way, and the world became just all vertically integrated multinationals that are larger and larger, there'll be no room for entrepreneurs and startups. But fortunately, I think the world has come totally the other way. You know, it's not Ted Levitt's world that he postulated in 1983. It's now completely opposite to the world that he postulated. It's not a homogenized, multinational, dominated world. Okay. Now, so I think it's huge cultural activity. There's something new because of technological development, because of the globalization of consumption, and the further globalization of production. And I think eventually you'll see some relocalization of production because of the globalization of consumption, which I think offers a lot of opportunities. Now, where would you take advantage? I would say very simple. Get exposure. It's one thing to talk about it, even in a forum like this, it's good, but I would say go and travel, kick the tires, see for yourself. I'm a great believer that for a young person, what is most valuable is to go out there and see for yourself and then decide. So I would encourage you to just get exposure in all the, in Zhongguancun, in Shenzhen, in Silicon Valley, and really go to witness where things are happening, and then get the exposure. Exposure is everything, and I think one or two trips like that at this stage of your career, I think will be extremely meaningful. Okay.
Dr. Fung, my name is Patrick. I'm a startup entrepreneur as well.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question that is closer to your heart.
Mm-hmm.
With the event of consumption globalization, as you said, the explosion of e-commerce globally, and the mass customization as you described, and finally, the atomization of supply chain, as you said. What have Li and Fung prepared yourself for these global changes?
How are we prepared?
Yes.
Well, I don't speak for Li and Fung, by the way. I'm no longer chairman. My brother is chairman, and my son is CEO. So I'm an observer. I think it all boils down to really one word: is talent. You really got to think about how you develop your own talent, but also acquire talent and so on. One of the things I did before when I was more active in Li and Fung, was to develop a in-house university. Something we call the Fung Academy. And that is geared not only to actually train our own people, which it has done very effectively, but we actually have a mission to make sure that our stakeholders could actually be brought up in terms of the quality of the people as well. Because we see ourselves as doing well not just as a company, but as a network. And the network has to be strong. So we have 15,000 suppliers in 40 countries around the world. And we did rough surveys, over 10 million workers in these. So we're orchestrating a global network. So what we're really doing is developing a lot of programs and courses, and because of the spread and the number of people is basically web-based, right? And to actually bring people, something very fundamental, health and safety And worker safety is very important to us. That's at the absolute top of our agenda, in zero tolerance. How do you train factory workers in fire safety? And we've developed material and so on like that, and then disseminated. It's things like that. So we actually help our stakeholders increase. And there's no way for me in this such a rapid changing world to anticipate it's going to be this or that. Like I said, the world, everybody says it's going to go omni, but nobody knows how and what. And it'll be very, very premature to commit to a certain course. But I think if we get the people that could react and react quickly. And there I go back to Hong Kong. One of our biggest advantages that Hong Kong people have is what Hong Kong people understand, zap sang. No, this is a very colloquial expression. That means our ability to react and size up the situation and do something about it. Hong Kong people excel in that. That is exactly the quality that's needed in today's world. And I say no more. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Fung. My name is Daniel. I'm also working on a startup, and you talk a bit about. Actually, I think it's almost a bit like a follow-up question of the last one. Is what kind of test and trash programs that Li and Fung has sort of implement internally, and is there a way to have that initiative involve more startups to gather external creativity, innovation, and just tag on my time and to ask one more question is, you don't talk about Zapsan, but how can you this test and trash thing can actually help you stay ahead of all these changes, and do you imagine all these things that are happening Li and Fung, what sort of company it will evolve to if, say, 50 years fast forward and mass customization and decentralized manufacturing actually happening everywhere, and does it become a supplier of design and material instead of finished products?
Well, let me answer your last question. His answer is I don't know. I think that's the whole gist of it, is that I think you need to have the human resources to be able to react and adapt. But to answer your first question, we're very focused on this idea of rapid experimentation and have this culture of innovation, but not just innovation. Everybody can dream up 10 ideas. It's to be able to rapidly experiment, test ideas, and then decide which is good, which is not good, which you should pursue more. That's the hard part. Dreaming up new ideas is frankly not that difficult. I dream up several ideas every day, and most of which you got to throw away. So it's really the rapid experimentation and then testing those ideas and getting results and then reacting to those that's important. So we're trying to develop a whole culture of rapid experimentation. We work very closely with a Stanford startup called Ideal. I don't know if you know, you should look up this firm. And they actually specialize in this. It was a spin-out from Stanford. They actually have offices now all over, including Shanghai. So we're closely with people like that. And we are now thinking through how we can conduct actual experiments at very rapidly and very low cost. We have a fairly big retail group, which is not public, actually it's private. So people don't hear too much about retail. But we have about 3,000 plus retail outlets in a number of chains. And frankly, the whole ethos of a retailer is test and trash. But the question is, now you've got to test and trash, not with how you move the products around or how to display, how to do a discount, but test and trash involving technology. And it's a little harder. So we're thinking through how we do that. And we cannot afford, when you come up with a new idea, you install it in 200 shops, and if it doesn't work, you rip it all out. So you've got to find a lab, literally a lab that is realistic, that is in the key markets like Shanghai, in which you can test real ideas in real environments and see how it works. and do it rapidly and with very low cost, and then to continue to experiment. So we're working on projects like that. When I have something to tell you, I will do so. Another question back here.
Thanks. Dr. Fung, hi.
Yeah.
I'm Jason Shaw. I'm a business school professor like you once were, except I went to a rival PhD program at Stanford, and also in marketing.
You know IDEO then?
Yes.
Yeah, one of the famous Stanford spin-offs.
So I know you come from a more supply chain and OIT background, but it's really heartening to hear you talk about creating value essentially for customers as well through all these means. And being involved in a lot of big data projects here at both Hong Kong universities and also major Chinese universities. It's true that there's a lot we don't know about what marketing will be in the future, but there are things we do know. For example, one is that there's going to be more about like capturing value, as you say, about efficiency gains, whether it's from brick-to-mortar smart shops to transitioning between devices and platforms and medias and such. And this is kind of like, I'm curious to hear what your reactions are to in terms of like solid, I think everyone else is interested too, solid proposals or things that you're doing in the face of these technological changes. And I guess they fall in the spectrum. One is things that you can address immediately. For example, all this insight from big data. Essentially, you know, with a good chance what people are going to buy before they buy it in certain environments. This is kind of like just in time on an individual scale, on a global scale. Like what kind of business innovations are you taking on for questions like this? There are also in the middle ground solution questions like I know the global supply chain in terms of shipping is highly inefficient. It's not like advertising exchanges that are done for third-party cookies or for Google. They're instantaneous. As you say, ships come back half empty sometimes, and they still do. And I know from people who have stats PhDs who are working on this problem that there's a lot of efficiency gains to be made. So there's that continuum. And finally, on the other extreme of the continuum, of course, I'm very appreciative that you brought in Ted Levitt's paper on marketing myopia. It's the first modern marketing research paper. And the lesson of that, of course, is that someone like Kodak goes out of business because they're so focused on film. And you come from a supply chain management side. I know you're doing more about capturing. You mentioned retail, but for something far in the future, let's say 3D printing, do you see that as a great threat? How does the Fung adapt to that? It seems if everyone has a 3D printer that's, let's say, much more efficient at creating actual products, then it's purely the intellectual property value of blueprints that become valuable, not the supply chain. How do you react to this continuum of problems from like immediately tractable opportunities to far off distant questions?
Well, it's a big question, a long one. Let me try to answer it. Starting from your last bit. Frankly, when I first realized the whole impact of supply chain, 3D printing, I really was quite taken. In fact, I used to think of the world this way. Li and Fung actually holds the key in my mind to the physical supply, right? Physical product, whether it's in our sourcing or our distribution and our logistics. And that is a funnel that frankly everybody needs to go through traditionally. I can say that interface, that all the software, all the stuff, you can swirl around, but eventually you got to go through the choke point. So we were quite comfortable. Let's just really hold tight to this choke point, and regardless of what the commotions are up there and all the newfangled things, it has to be eventually come in. 3D printing is the first technology that really threw out that thesis. Maybe there is no choke point. Okay? So I think you really have to think. And I feel that I don't really know the answer to that if it takes place. But my conception is that the world won't go to the Nike website thing that I described that quickly in the jump. It will probably morph to how do you better utilize small space at retail and do bricks and clicks type stuff. It's really putting a 3D printing machine you know, like for example, we have a chain of convenience store called Circle K. Very small shops. How do we sell a lot more product in a very small space and even get high efficiency gains? You know, we have about, just in Hong Kong, we have 750,000 transactions every day. How we move to high value added items, high ticket items, right? Now sometimes the ticket could be quite low, cup of coffee, so on. So you can think of actually putting a 3D printing machine at retail, and it could actually customize a lot of products. So don't think too far. Maybe the first thing you customize are just collectibles. You know, you may know this company called Franklin Mint. You know, you collectibles, but you do mass customization with that. But then the question is, okay, do we have the technology to do that? The answer is not yet. See, the technology has been moving in the opposite direction towards sending rockets to the moon. It has to move to this level. Can we use recyclable and low-cost material so that the cost isn't prohibitive to do every piece? You got to ask the question, how long would a consumer wait before you do your customized thing? 10 minutes? 10 hours? Come back and pick up the next day? So the consumer reaction is, to me, a complete, you know, ripe for testing. And that's the type of thing. So you have a technology which may be good, may work, but what is the consumer acceptance of that technology? Nobody can really tell you until you test it. So that's how we're kind of looking at it. So how we actually participate in this new world, when it comes, we think that we could actually do the first stage and really think about getting 3D printing into the retail. And then helping customers do that. And then helping supply a world that is becoming more and more niche, larger and larger of smaller niche markets. Imagine the world's supply is one big pool, right? You're now cutting that pool into a large number of small pools. When I want to predict demand for a big pool, it's actually very easy. If everybody buys a black Model T, okay, I can predict demand very predictably. But when I cut it into 10,000 different models and so on, every small pool would fluctuate. It's very hard to predict. So you got to really think about forecasting, how to actually shorten the delivery lead time so that you get as much as information as possible before you lock in. And then also doing the production process, if you were asking, in a manner which is much more towards lean manufacturing and fast response type manufacturing. So I think we're really now addressing the intermediate. The ultimate thing that I described, I have no reaction, I have no solution yet. But I think once we go there, we will morph into a proper solution.
Next question right there.
Hi, I'm Yiping. Right now I'm no more a journalist, but I'm a small entrepreneur in Science Park.
And you're coming in your capacity as an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm working for the Hong Kong Innovation Service Limited.
Yeah.
Just have because exactly we are doing the 3D printing service platform, so I can share some more detail on your story, but the story is not yours, because what the 3D printer can print the Nike through is 3 million Hong Kong dollar, more than that. So not you can maybe you can do it, but I can't do it with my methods. So the story is like that. We call D2C, designer to customer. So the designer will have a master design, but everyone can have a minor change of their DIY. I can change the color, change the size or some more detail. Then the file will go to the professional printer, just like the photo printer. You can do it on your residence, but the better idea is go to the shop to print it out. Then the logistics still, the Lianfeng or the other logistic companies still have their business to do this. The new story, what we think about this is we should using our supply chain system to divide the different parts in the more capital.
Since our time's very limited, get to your question.
So we still have room, just I have you as a senior entrepreneur to lead us to using our reach to help the new year of the industry. But we have a big missing part. We don't have industrial designers, unfortunately. I recently repeated.
So you're talking about the lack of manpower and talent.
The major part.
Yeah.
We don't have the talent to turn the technology to product, but we got some more in some in all over the world, but not Hong Kong.
Yeah. Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. One back there.
Okay, hi, my name is Sean Chen, and I'm a brand owner in Hong Kong. I have a question about, this is a hot topic in China, about the, like you said, the 2.0 Fung local shops, and also Mao's 24-hour delivery from e-commerce to the local customers. And what's your opinion about the 2 methods, and also the challenges to the logistics industry and also to the supply chain in China? And also, since I'm working with finger shopping in Hong Kong, and
okay, there needs to be a question.
Oh, it's related. Dr. Fung knows it's related actually.
Sure.
Finger shopping and circular K too.
Yeah.
So do you see a future in those and comparison between the 2 methods?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think all this is really. Let me answer actually the question that was posed and then this question together. See, the world was actually very distinct in the previous 30-year period, let's say. You could be thinking of the supply chain, there's a design phase, then there's a production phase, then the distribution, and then retailing. Now, actually, the whole thing is merged. And then you're actually circling back and forth. In fact, the type of talent you may need is not distinct. It's actually much more holistic and integral. And instead of cutting it this way, you're actually slicing it this way. And the consumer are actually participating. Now, so actually, I think to answer the talent question, I think there's room for a completely new type of talent. It's not just industrial designers. I think there are, probably they need to completely change their mindset. That's why Hong Kong people with our ability to adapt and look at new things, sort of jump onto new things quickly, is going to be a hell of an advantage. And I think our education system is such that needs to be a lot more flexible to account for that. The whole thing is now really merging. And I think what is a design phase, etc., crowdsourcing, all that is completely merged. What is a production phase? What is a delivery phase? It used to be very distinct. And you have these very, very categorized, specialized skills. Now you actually need holistic, integrative skills. Okay. Now on the finger shopping, I think it's a very good example. Finger shopping is actually the Circle K product, in which everything is done on the web and then you pick up in the store. And we use our network of convenience stores as basically pickup points. Advantage is that you can actually look at the product and terminate the transaction there if it's not what you like, and then you decide to buy, and you can pay conventional way. A lot of people don't want to put their credit cards on the web, etc. So that to me is an example of bricks and clicks. In fact, that is in the web rooming sector. That's in segment 4, what we call segment 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's 2x2 matrix it's initiation on the web and transaction in the shop. So initiation online and transaction offline. And I think that's just one example. There are many examples of that. We also have to do the showrooming, which is initiation offline and transaction online, and keep thinking that way. That's where the growth sectors are. And I think what you mentioned is just an example of the of what could be implemented. Now that also is a test and trash. What Fung is doing is test and trash. What I'm a little concerned about is you immediately, on the base of an idea, lay in 500 shops. I hope the idea works. If it doesn't work, you can rip out 500 shops. It's pretty expensive. Okay.
And our final question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Fung. My name is Vivian Lau, and I'm a shareholder of the Fung Group and the Global Brands Group.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very insightful speech and the answers. So my question is about brands. From production globalization to consumption globalization, what comes to my mind is brands globalization, especially under the influence of the so-called Amazon effect or the Taobao effect. As the e-commerce sector grows, more and more businesses taking on the model of cheap, cheap, cheap. and therefore it's getting harder and harder for businesses to reap a profit unless they have a brand. So what are some of your advice to entrepreneurs who are thinking about going that direction in terms of either owning a brand or licensing or managing a brand? And what do you think about the business opportunities in terms of the two areas? Thank you.
You want the 2-minute answer or the 2 hour? I've been thinking about the question you raised for a long time. You know, sometimes people think in the age of internet that the whole brand will be subsumed and homogenized, and the only thing that matters is the platform, right? Anybody that wants to buy anything in the States, they log on to a platform, which is Amazon, and you get all the brands. And then the brands, you know, I think frankly just the opposite. I think I would actually reinforce the importance and the supremacy of the brands. Let me tell you why. If you start thinking about this, you got to ask yourself, what is the real value added of a multi-brand retailer, especially with pure web? What is the real value add? Are you simply saving the consumer a few clicks in the comfort of his or her living room? Now, I pose this question to all our .com units. They said, oh, well, we had content, we had this. If I'm on the children's thing, I want content, I go to the Disney website. And if I want to buy Hasbro, I go on the Hasbro website. See, over time, the multi-brand retailers on the web, okay, is going to be sliced piece by piece by the brand owners. What is your value added? You have a better range? No way. The brand owner will have a much bigger range. You have more inventory? No way. Can you do it cheaper? Not in the long run, because these are the guys that produce it, you know. And actually, you live at their mercy eventually, because they actually allow you the margin to survive as a multi-brand retailer. If they actually lower the price of their direct website, you're gone. So you gotta really think through the value of the platform versus the value of the brand. And I have only one conclusion. In the long run, the whole thing will morph to value to the brand. That's the only thing that's sustaining long term. And now this is a very controversial statement, because this is definitely not the world is saying right now, and everything's moving to the platform. I fear for the future of the multi-brand retailers, especially if they're web only. Their solution, in my mind, is actually link it back down to the ground, make it bricks and clicks. When is a multi-brand retailer in the real world bricks and clicks? I think there is a reason. You know, this is the shopping experience. It's the you get a child to a Toys R Us shop. They can look at 20 different brands of cars, you know, etc. You know, and that's different. So I think the multi-brand retailers will have to actually do the omni-channel experience, so that they can link into something that can be truly defendable and differentiated over the long term. Or they've got to morph out of that. Amazon one day will become a brand. They probably will.
Super.
Yeah.
What a way to end. I know there's a dozen other questions and a couple that I had, but that'll wait for another time. I know your time is very important.
I'm sorry, I keep giving 2-hour answers.
This is our 6th session that we've had in a series co-presented by MIT Enterprise Forum and the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation. I'm grateful for your attendance. We're looking at improving and looking at next year as well, so if you could just take a second to fill in that and leave that at the registration desk, it would be greatly appreciated. We have John Chen, who is an old friend and CEO of BlackBerry, who's going to be in Victor's seat October 17th, and he's going to tell you how he's going to turn BlackBerry around and why it's still going to be a very important brand. But before we do that, let's show our tremendous appreciation.
By the way, you should all come to visit John Chen. He's a great guy. And he will give a great presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.